Hey now, and welcome to the 20th episode of the Help Find the Others podcast. If you've been here all along, welcome back. But if this is your first time listening to us, then welcome. I'd like to start today's podcast out with a quote from Mr. Graham Hancock. There are all kinds of ways to challenge ourselves. Some people do it by climbing a mountain or scuba diving. The most profound and challenging ordeals is to drink ayahuasca. It is in a way the ultimate adventure. So I chose that quote. One is I just came back from a road trip, mini 4-day vacation, and on the way, I was listening to a podcast from Graham Hancock, and he's one of my favorite authors and thinkers of our time right now. But I also chose it just because of it talking about ayahuasca. And our guest today is Rob from Canada, and he has some significant experience with ayahuasca that I want to talk about. But first, Rob. Let's. Why don't you walk us up to that point? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Actually, Stan is on the line too. How you doing there, man? Forgot to introduce you.
I'm doing great, man.
Good. So, and Rob, just why don't you give us, the background and walk us up to the point where you ended up experimenting with ayahuasca.
Hi, guys, and thanks for the opportunity. Before I get started, I just want to put things in context. So I've never done anything along the lines of drugs other than getting drunk in high school until my 40s, at which point I was introduced by a friend. And I was quite reluctant, and he introduced me to an ayahuasca ceremony. And you got to put things in context. Like I graduated in engineering. I'm in software development. I'm pretty grounded. It takes a lot to get me unsettled. And this idea of, drinking something that's a Schedule 1 was, it was out there. So, but it was in a structured context, right? It wasn't like, let's go to a rave and pop some pills. It was more like, prepare for this, get your intentions right, don't eat these foods 2-3 days before. And then come in, and it was very structured, and so I went, and then that was sort of my starting point, and I did a lot of ayahuasca in Canada. There are various points, we call them, and lots of places in the States, and I went down to Brazil as well. And then once I got comfortable with the idea that there's actually nothing, well, shouldn't say there's nothing to worry about. I mean, you have to have respect, but after that I moved on, or shouldn't say moved on, but I interspersed my menu, shall we say, with mushrooms and also some LSD and MDMA, and then experiment with some DMT. So I feel like I've got a fairly rounded backdrop.
Yeah, well, so okay, so ayahuasca was the first psychedelic experience, and it wasn't until you were in your 40s?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's a really that's very interesting, to put myself in perspective when I hear, a story like that. It's like I had already quit doing psychedelics at one point in my 20s, and So it's quite a contrast. But was it now? Did you have friends that you know talk to you about it, or was it totally you just researched through writings and internet and stuff like that?
No, it was actually a friend that I trusted, and he was way out there, and I suppose part of my psyche, like on one hand I'm pretty conservative and grounded. On the other hand, I do like to jump out of airplanes and climb mountains, right? So I have a split personality in the sense of there's the risk taker and there's the the guy that likes spreadsheets. So he was one of those friends that was way out there, and I trusted him, and there's no I'm not looking back. I mean, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to my life, in the sense that it offered opportunities in it offered viewpoints and awarenesses that just weren't available in everyday life. I mean, if you got a problem or an issue, you can talk to your friends or you can talk to this, but nothing, it's like, okay, fine, shit happens, but it's not like you get this massive floodlight showing you, what's going on, what things are you unaware of, what are the shadows in your mind, what is your subconscious doing, why are you here again, right? I mean, just to put things into perspective, my relationship life has been, what shall we say, challenging, and by the time I started ayahuasca, I had completed 2 divorces and 2 common law relationships, and things were not looking great. So it's not until late 30s to early 40s that I realized that maybe I'm part of the problem, rather than this is just a problem in making choices that aren't, in finding the wrong mate, so to speak, right? It's more like, who am I?
Yeah.
This relationship. So yeah, so I did it, and it was it's like anything that you do the first time. It was certainly nervous and profound, but not scary. And the complete antithesis of anything having to do with alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Like to me, alcohol is basically a downer, and all the psychedelics are like these big openings that allow you to feel and see things that you wouldn't otherwise see.
Yeah. So would you say that whatever drove you to go down the path, starting with ayahuasca, but just the, psychedelics in general, was more for, to like alternative therapy, like to find out more about yourself, or were you having like some, religious, like spiritual journey as well, or just to do life out of the box for a bit?
Well, that's a good question, and maybe it's a bit of everything.
Yeah.
I was at the time meditating, I definitely had I don't know, what should we call it, like a spiritual awareness, or an inner knowing that there was more than just the ground underneath your feet, that there was more at play in this relative reality. But that really opened up a lot more after engaging in the psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminded me of that one experiment. Was it O'Leary or one of those early guys that gave LSD to a bunch of seminary students?
Oh, the Good Friday experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was it was well, I don't think there were. I mean, there was seminary students in the group, but it was at a Good Friday service in a Catholic church, and I believe it was psilocybin.
But I think it speaks to where you at, right? I mean, if I had no spiritual awareness whatsoever, then I think my mind would have maybe interpreted it in a different way.
Yeah.
And and then, and if you're in a really squinchy, scared kind of place, I mean, you're gonna have a bad trip.
Yeah.
You're gonna freak yourself right out.
Oh yeah.
And so full disclosure, I definitely had that spiritual component, right? I mean, it's not like I was going to Sunday school or any of that, because the regular dogma that that's currently on the menu, it just wasn't doing it for me. But yeah, so getting back to your question, so yeah, there was a spiritual component. There was and it's one thing to sit there and meditate and get all calm, and then half an hour later you run into an argument, either on the road or with your partner or somebody at work, and then it's like, well, what's the point of that? So it's not just doing the meditation. It's like exercising what you learned in your meditation or in your psychedelic states, and applying it in your everyday life, right? So that's, I think, the psychological component. Like, it shows you things, but then you're still gonna make it happen in the regular consciousness world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once in a while, like, you need a reset. Well, I need a reset.
Yeah. For
because
sure.
That fear, ego mentality that we inherit, and it's more pronounced in others, and in some people than others, but it's all there, right? And it's basically all about survival, and it can, it needs to be put in its place.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the I can't remember, one of the books, the Great Swan, one of the gurus of ancient India talked about making the ego your servant rather than you being slave to the ego.
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about. So it's not like there's any quick fix, and you're going to take this and your life will change. Well, I think your life will change, but in order to make it happen, you got to go find the gold and then take the gold and apply it in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, like, at a base level, like the purpose and why I think, like, everybody, should try some psychedelic to get to some psychedelic state at some point, at least once in their life. The reason I think that is, whether it's for spiritual or personal reasons or just getting high, even, psychedelics have the ability to take, what is a part of our ego, is that we think we know at least a significant portion about life and ourself and something, and the psychedelic state takes that and slaps you in the face and says, no, you don't know shit, and you probably never will. And it takes everyone needs to have that realization at least once, because that's such a problem with the world, and society, is that we all get stuck thinking we know what's best, and life doesn't show that that's ever true. And the psychedelic state helps you come to that realization, in a moment. And I think that's really important. I would respect, a preacher or a politician or a therapist or a parent or all of these people. I would respect their, direction on stuff a lot more if I knew that they had at least one psychedelic experience in their life,
Well, if anything, it shows you that you have an ego, right?
Yeah.
First step is realizing that you're not your ego. There's something beyond that, and in order to recognize it, you need to step out of it, right? Like, if you're in a fish tank, you can't tell there's water. Like, you're just in it. But once you step out of the fish tank, you can say, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And without having a psychedelic experience, you're so consumed with, this is the reality, this is truth. And fundamentally, one of the things that all these experiences have taught me is that it's all made up. We make it up.
Yeah.
Our perceptions, the things that, like, our brains are these massive computers that project reality, in based on our perceptions, right? Because initially, when we grew up, we didn't know this whole visual library of, this is a lamp, this is a card, this is a book, this is a candle. Like, they were just colors on a canvas.
Yeah.
And so, some of us had a harder time with our childhood and with our experiences, and we started building up negative perceptions more so, and vice versa. And so these experiences allow us to see those things for what they are, and then upon recognizing them, allow us to change them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And on the motivation front, I would say, given my propensity to be avoidant in relationships, and when the so-called shit hits the fan, to run, like I'm married now for 10 years, which is the longest I've been married, with all the others, and I would credit that 100% to having an awareness of my patterns, and using MDMA in particular, and doing some of these experiences with my wife, because that just resets all the ego defenses, and keeps things humming along the way you want them, rather than getting stuck in the drama of your ego.
Yeah, because I mean, and that's one thing that can be so damaging in any relationship is, like, if the egos don't match, and both egos are pretty strong, that's a recipe for disaster. There's some egos that are either not very strong in one of the partners, or even if they're both strong, they are a good match, and then that marriage might not have any problems. But I agree that I can feel that in my own marriage, that we can just start kind of button heads, on the subconscious level almost, and it takes, the every now and then kind of like a refresher, psychedelic experience together, that, it's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry I was being a dick, like, basically, and it's
Yeah, I mean,
unfortunate.
it's always the same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you go in there and you're sort of apprehensive, and it's like, oh, is this going to work? And no, and then it's like, the first thing that comes out of your mouth on both sides is, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. You just realize how off the rails you get, just following, and I mean, I think a lot of it is just society driven, and then just the distraction of life, that how distracting, technology and life is now, that you kind of get apart, and to share that moment, to come back together. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And,
I do want to caution, though, right? Like, you got to treat it with intention. Like, you can't just, pop a tab or a pill or what have you, and then just saying, well, why don't we sort this out? Like, I've heard of people that were doing alcohol, or having a couple of drinks, and then trying to do mushrooms, and then trying to reconnect, and the thing went completely off the rails. I mean, it's like, you gotta give it some some space, or some, like a container, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's important. And then just on one last thing on the psychological front, like, the relationship part is one thing, and then the other one was, I went through a period of depression where, like, just all hell broke loose. Everything that I cared about kind of just crumbled in a 6-month period, right? Like, I had a good friend die. I had a problem with one of my joints. I had cash flow problems in one of my contracts, and it was just like, everything was just starting to collapse. And then it was it was pretty bad. Like, I was surprised how unpleasant, to say the least, a depressed ego can get. And for the longest time, I wouldn't do anything, because how you're in, right? Like, when you're depressed, it's like, why bother, right? No, you don't do anything. And then my partner finally said, well, like, you got to do something. So, I went to do some counseling, and of course, the standard thing is, well, we'll do some counseling, but you can take these little pills for the next year and a half, and then maybe something will change. And I said, well, that doesn't ring true. And of course, I was aware of the conflict between the stuff they prescribe and the fact that you can't take psychedelics, right? So for about once a month during that time, I tried different psychedelics. Like I did some LSD, I did 2 or 3 mushrooms, and the last mushroom experience finally broke it. It was like and it was unpleasant, I'll tell you, but it broke. So without going into I can go into the details if you want, but bottom line is I got better results with the psychedelics, and obviously with the support of my partner. Then and maybe the counseling helped as well, but I feel I got out of it way faster than I did with, the year-long plan, right?
Yeah. Well, I think counseling definitely helps regardless. I definitely, for anyone going through depression, like, that's the first step, is you should talk to someone, get help.
And it helps you frame things, for sure. I'm not poo-pooing the counseling itself, but I am poo-pooing the, here, take this Prozac forever.
Yeah.
And all the side effects and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's the problem, is that I believe that there's 2 kinds of depression, but one is a chemical imbalance, and so the psychiatrists are right. A SSRI for some people is necessary, but I don't think that is the most common depression. I think the most common depression is society and just life in general based. And I think the role of the therapist should be to decide, which it is, and to be able to figure that out. Unfortunately, it's easy to just prescribe the pill, where I think there's maybe both should require medicine. It's just one should be a psychedelic, and I would, that's why I hope, psychedelic therapy progresses to the point where a therapist could be like, what, I think you need to go drink ayahuasca, honestly, instead of taking the pills that, I put most of the patients on.
And particularly combined with, reframing.
Yeah.
Framing your world. But to me, like, the second kind of depression that you're talking about it's more like the ego's gone amok. Like,
yeah,
you've become a complete slave to it, rather than having that wherewithal awareness that allows you to differentiate and saying, is this thought constructive or not? Because we just get into these, absolutely consuming habits. Like, it's kind of like you touch the stove, it's hot, and your hand just jerks away. Like, there isn't an analysis of, hey, my hand's hot, maybe I should move my hand. Like, it just happens, right? So something happens, you don't get the contract or whatever. The mind immediately goes, it's over, you're not worth it, you're whatever, right? Like, all that negative talk becomes just like a waterfall of, and then it instantly, takes you down further. Whereas if you just maintain, like, that little bit of awareness to say, hey, these thoughts are not real, these thoughts are baggage from the past, and I'm not gonna, like, identify with them or get on the roller coaster and take the deep dive, right? It really came like that. Like, when I was in that mushroom experience, and by the way, the first hour and it was one of those 5G experiences. I was motivated by one of your podcasts where 5G in the dark, and anyway, the first hour and a half were just awful, right? I mean, it was just like, why am I doing this? And it just crushing, just soul crushing. But after an hour and a half, it was one of, like, it was probably like the top 3 experience I've ever had. And I was at this point where I could see my depression as this thing over there, and there was absolutely no reason to ever go back there again.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cool thing was that lasted, like, it still lasted. That was only 3 months ago.
Yeah. I mean, there's some, whether it's just brain rewiring or just a shift in your perspective and a change in your psychology. I mean, that's that's why I was saying, like, I think everyone needs at least one experience like that, because even if they don't need more, or think they need more, like, there will be a long lasting, if not permanent, change in perspective, at least a little. It polishes the looking glass, and
For sure.
yeah,
And I think, but just as a caveat, it wasn't like that in of it. It was more like, yeah, okay, so I had that experience. It's way over there. I don't have to go there, and that was that. And then you get into everyday life, and stuff happens, right? Sometimes
yeah,
you win, sometimes you lose, and whatever. And when you lose, I I saw that ego come back up with its menu of all negativity, but it but I I had enough wherewithal to exercise discretion and say, I'm not going to order from that menu today.
yeah,
Right? Like I think that was the missing piece, because if you just go have your experience and you come back down, and then those tendencies, I mean, they're habits, right? They're not just going to go away. You need to exercise some discretion. And but what the experience allows you to do is have enough wherewithal to have the awareness to make the choice. Before, you were just completely unconscious, not making and constantly making the bad choice.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
so that was very cool. And I guess you want to get into some ayahuasca.
Yeah. So, like, what did you say your first time was in Brazil, or you ended up?
No, I did
Oh,
a lot of. Well, let's look at big picture, right? So
okay.
in the ayahuasca originally came from a shamanistic tradition in the South American jungle, right? And uh, so there's all these different lineages and different approaches. You've got the Peruvian side with I think the Shapiro or Shapico Indians. You've got various different tribes, and they've got slight variations on the brew. And then you had something really interesting happen in Brazil, where you've got the Portuguese Catholics coming into the jungle. You've got African ex-slaves who were doing rubber planting in northern Brazil, and then you've got them meeting the shaman types in the jungle. So you got this mix of African mysticism, hardcore Portuguese Catholicism, and tribal shamanism happening. And what came out of that was a church called the Santo Daime, and another variation called, Un Vegetal, and they're basically doing ayahuasca ceremonies in sort of a church-like construct, right? So the shamanistic type tends to be more, again, like with ayahuasca, because it's got the the MAO inhibitor. Like, you got to be really careful with your diet, right? Like, there's certain things you can't do because they create health risks and all that.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful about your diet, and then all of them say, like, get clear about your intention of what you want to get out of this thing. But in the at least in my experience with the Peruvian shamanistic tradition, you're in a retreat center of some sort, or someplace, and then you meet. There could be, like, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 20. I haven't been any larger than that for the Peruvian version. People, and everybody's got the yoga mat and maybe some sort of a foam pad out around the room, and you've got the shaman sort of on one part of the room, and he's got his little setup there. And it tends to be in the evening, sometimes starting around sunset, and then it goes all night, like till 4 a.m. And the shaman runs the show, and the shaman sings, shaman does energy work, and you get to have your experience. Whereas in the Santo Daime experience, they have different, they call them works, and they have different ones. Sometimes there's only 4 to 6 hours, and some of them are 12 hours. Some of them are dancing works. So you're basically doing doing the two-step for pretty much 12 hours in a circular fashion around the church. That was in Brazil, and that was like, I don't know, at least 300, maybe more people, and then you have them in smaller venues like in North America, where again you could be dancing or you could be sitting in concentration. So all of them have structure, right? Like it's not like you're in your own space doing your own thing, and you can do whatever you want when you want, right? You're kind of contained, right? Like they want you to stay relatively closer within a confined area, because stuff can happen, right? I mean, people can sometimes have experiences that are difficult, and then that's the work of the shaman or the person. And there's some key people that are experienced in the Santo Daime experience that make it as safe as possible, so that help those people go through those negative experiences. So that's the big picture. Does that kind of make sense? Any questions?
Oh yeah, no, that's it's pretty interesting that it's kind of this ancient tradition that is kind of splintered off into different disciplines almost.
Yeah, and even within the in the Catholicism, so you've got these guys, like the guy that founded the Santo Daime. I don't know the exact details, but he's since dead, but he started in a place called Mapia, and just to give you, I went down to Brazil after, I don't know, having done 20 or more of these things in Ontario and Quebec, and also in California, and I thought, well, let's see what it's like in the Big Apple, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So I flew down to Rio, and then it's legal in Brazil. So we had some, there are some opportunities to meet or to meet others and have a small work in Rio and along the route, but it was like another 4-hour flight to get to. Maybe it was only 3 hours, but you're sort of in the middle, kind of like the difference between you in New York and you got to fly to Kansas, right? And then in Kansas, they're in the middle of the jungle, and then you got to take a 4-hour car ride. Except, even though the road looks like a highway on the map, it's basically just a mud track for 4 hours. We're driving there and the mud's flapping up past the side of the window, right? It was insane. I thought for sure we're gonna get stuck. And then you gotta wait, and then you gotta wait for your boat, and then you take a boat ride, which is basically nothing but a fishing boat, and you're sitting there with your stuff, and you're going for 9 hours in this fishing boat, up this river. It was like, holy crap, hope nothing bad happens up here. And then you're in this place called Mapia, and that's kind of like their, I don't know, I guess it'd be the equivalent of the Vatican in Catholicism, and they they have a wooden church that holds, it's quite large, holds hundreds of people, and that's Reuben where I saw the storage containers, and I think there were these 5-gallon water jugs that you see in offices, those large bluish ones, and they were all filled with ayahuasca, stacked at least 20 feet high. For sure, hundreds of gallons of ayahuasca.
Jeez.
It was just like, wow. And and so then every, I don't know, 3-4 days you had to work in the church, and some of those works would be like sitting down in concentration, and some of those works would be dancing works, and it was over Christmas, right? I was down there I think for 2-3 weeks, and then we had one or two works in the jungle with just the foreigners, because we're talking, this is an international thing, right? There had to be at least 200 foreigners from this, everywhere in North America, from South America, from Central Europe, from Czech Republic, Poland, Germany, and some Asian people too, although not as much in Asia. And it was a really eclectic group, and there were some people there for drug rehab, right? So a psychologist would take 10 of his patients and go down there, and he'd have counseling while he was doing this stuff. I was there mostly on my own, but with help from people that had gone before, so I kind of knew my way around. And I also was lucky enough to run into a Californian lady that knew Portuguese, so So she and I kind of hooked up a bit, and she helped me, she helped me navigate, right? Because she was going to the same places.
Huh.
And some of those, like I remember that one work where it was a dancing work, and I had already done one or two, and I thought, oh my God, like how am I gonna, you basically got the hymn book, and the idea, and this is 200 pages of hymns they're kind of like they were inspired by their leader, right? So and then there's and then the leader's niece and leader's brother, and I don't know, some other people. So it's kind of like a little bit what's the word? A little bit of nepotism in the organization, but this is, I don't know how old it is. It's got to be over maybe, I'd say close to 100 years or so, way back when. So anyway, regardless, you got this hymn book, and you're starting, and they're either in Portuguese, and if you're lucky, you can get a hymn book that's been translated, so at least you can kind of know what you're singing in Portuguese. And they're okay, although some of them have definite overtones of Catholicism, right? So there's a bit of righteousness and all that. But it all depends on where you are. Like if you want to get, you can go and resist some of those verses because you feel they're infringing on your stuff, or you can just say, well, that's their perspective, and I'm not going to make it mean this. I'm not gonna let my aversion to structured religion take me out of this experience and what the experience has to offer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sitting. No, I'm not sitting. I'm standing, right? And it's basically a two-step. Dun 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 dun. Dun. Once in a while it goes to a waltz, but you're pretty much defined to like a 3-foot square in your place in the church, and there's as I said, hundreds of people there, all sort of going circular, and you've got the leader in the middle, and a band in some places. Not a band, like a couple of people that are adding maybe a guitar and a bass or something like that. That's down in Mapia, right? Like in North America, you may just have people. What do you call those things that you shake? Basically, a little bit of percussion, right? People have a bit of percussion, but most of the music
tambourine.
comes from singing. Yeah, tambourine. Most of the stuff comes from singing. So here I am in the first hour or so, and my back's starting to hurt, and this is starting to hurt, and I'm like, oh man, how am I going to make this? And then I got it in my head that the tribal knowledge is you should top up your dose every 30 hymns, right? So each hymn might be 2 pages, but you're doing like endless reframes. So I don't know, maybe a hymn is like 3-4 minutes, so 30 times 3, so an hour and a half. So I count the hymns. It tells you how much I was in the experience, right?
Yeah.
I count the hymns. I'm like, okay, 30 hymns, and I go back to the quote bar, right? And I mean, it's literally like a bar down there. You get a shot glass, like standard shot glass, and they don't speak any English, so all you get to do is show how much you want between your index finger and your thumb. And so you get the full glass, the half glass, quarter glass, whatever you want. So I went for the full glass, and after the 90th hymn, I was on the side of the church on the floor. Like I wanted to know what the threshold was, right? And I found the threshold, and it wasn't like I was paralyzed per se, but like it was just like too much. I had to lie down, and all I could do is be with that, period.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, sometimes when you take a strong mushroom dose and it's just in your face and all stuff is happening. It was almost like beyond your face. I don't know how to describe it. Other than like it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't pleasant either.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like the visions that you can get were better or more intense. If anything, they were less. It was almost like you were so that there was so much impingement on your awareness, not so much awareness, but like on your physical body that it kind of took you out of the experience, except you couldn't go very far. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So after that, it's like, because for a guy that likes to challenge himself to jump out of airplanes, wanting to find your threshold dose, I mean, that was a natural progression, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So then didn't do that anymore. But you could tell, like, so maybe instead of every 30, I would top up, maybe every 45 or every 50, and maybe not top off a full glass, but maybe only a half a glass. And then at 4, we started at 7, and at 4 in the morning there was a short break. Just some people wanted a bite because they were getting hungry. I didn't really feel like eating. And then at 4:30 or 5 it started again, or maybe it was 3 in the morning. I don't remember. It was sometime in the middle of the night. It stopped, but that feeling of, oh my God, I'm never going to make it through the night. I'm just going to have to sneak out of here and forfeit my experience, completely left me, right? And by 7 in the morning, when the leader called the work closed, I thought, we're just getting started. Like, why stop now? It was really fascinating how there's physical fatigue, and then there's physical fatigue moderated by the ego.
Yeah.
Right, and there was definitely part of that. So that was, and then we had various other experiences in the jungle. Again, just a smaller group. And like the level of connectedness that you feel to nature with ayahuasca, I think, is quite strong, especially when you do it outside. But I think you can say that for mushrooms as well.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I had a LSD experience last week outside that that it enhances nature just as much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was definitely a yeah. I mean, there were some beautiful things that came out of that, and then once I left Mapia, and well, I mean, just as an aside, I got stung by something nasty in this place, 9 hours from the nearest car, and it started getting a little red blotch around, with like around the inside of my elbow, and I thought, well, he'll go away. And then the next morning I woke up, and everything from the elbow down was red, and I'm going, holy shit, I'm in deep doo-doo now, right? Like, I'm in the middle of nowhere, and my arm's infected. And no, what do I do? So fortunately, they had one doctor that was there on his own journey, but he had they told me to go down to the infirmary, right? So I get to the infirmary, and it's like basically a shed with a couple of benches on the side with some medical stuff, and no, like, the windows open, no nets, and birds flying through the rafters. And I was thinking, like, I am done, right? I'm gonna die here. And then he's like looking through some rusty kidney dish, those little dishes, and I was like, oh my God, like, I hope he doesn't pull out a rusty needle or something like that. And he did find a pack of sterilized stuff where you had to, like, rip the package open, right? And then he took some tweezers, and it turned out like there was just a tiny bit, like an eighth of an inch of the stinger was still left in the skin, and that's what's causing all the inflammation. So he cleaned that out, and then things recovered. So, going down there for in that tradition anyway, like way deep into the jungle, is not for the faint of heart, right?
Yeah.
You definitely have. I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't happen to everybody, but possibilities exist. And then I went to another place even deeper in the jungle, if you can imagine, where you go to it was actually on the Brazilian border to Peru, and so it's basically like flying from New York to Vancouver or San Francisco, and then you take one of those river boats for 2 days. And
wow.
when you watch those Amazonian documentaries where you've got the carve out canoes with a little single engine motor, or you've got those larger river boats and they're just kind of trucking along on the river, right? You've seen those before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what you don't get on the documentary is the mind crushing noise of that engine that's going boop 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 24/7.
Oh man.
I'm wearing earplugs the whole way, and I try to get as far away from it as possible. So I'm like actually hanging out on the roof, saying, okay, like this is as far as I can get the front roof of the thing, get as far away from the engine as possible. And then, at nighttime, like there's no beds or anything like that. You just get to string your hammock up on the lower deck, and that's that. And the captain, well, so-called captain, I mean, basically just a guy and his engine takes us, keeps going. One night it was raining so hard they actually had to stop, and we had to wait that out, and then start again. So and then we got to the end, and then we had to hike for 3 hours to get to the settlement, and basically just little huts with hammocks, and they did have some netting, but you still had, I mean, everywhere in the hammocks you had to have mosquito netting, right? Because the mosquitoes were pretty nasty, and they would actually have a vaporizer, like one of those handheld gasoline engine driven vaporizers, and once a day they'd run around camp and spray the camp, right? So it was not the most ecologically friendly place, but the mosquitoes were so bad that if you didn't do that, like you'd have to walk around in a bodysuit all the time.
Yeah.
So, but I had some interesting works there. Like, I mean, we're talking totally off the grid, totally primitive, like pit toilets, no running water. I had to filter all your water, and so three things happened. One, I went on a hike with the local young dudes who go harvest the vine, and so we hiked for 3 hours through the jungle, and I'm watching this guy basically take the burlap of a sack and just tie it between his ankles, and then use that to climb a tree. And like he's up there, 100 feet, cutting this vine down. I was thinking, man, like if anything ever goes wrong here, he is so dead, right?
Yeah.
And but I guess they know what they're doing, and that's just the way it is. And so we're collecting this vine, and then that night we had to work, and I mean I close my eyes and all I can do is see vines, right? And then the experience became quite dark. So it's to the point where I was starting to remember that scene in Indiana Jones where you had the snake come out of the skull.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like a lot of that, and I was like, what's all this, right? It wasn't like it scared me, or it was like freaking me out or anything like that. It was more like an annoyance, right? So I kept my eyes more or less open for the majority of that, because sometimes you can, especially when you're sitting down in a concentration type scenario, you can have some pretty amazing visuals,
Mm-hmm.
like things that are just absolutely impossible in everyday consciousness.
Oh yeah.
And I wouldn't say that those visuals, like, it's not like I got any clear information from them or anything like that. But the psycho-emotional space was open, vast, and you could, the learning would come, for me anyway, come from that. And then at that time, when we finished, we sort of just having a small snack before going to bed, early in the morning. And my friend, the California lady that knows Portuguese, she apparently had a rough ride processing stuff around her father, and she said, could you just put your hands on my shoulders so I can get grounded, right? It's like I'm the epitome of grounded, and she's out there, right? I mean, you kind of just talk about meditation and she's in an altered state, right? And anyway, so I put my hands on on her shoulder, and I got a jolt. Like, it was the weirdest thing. Like, I can tell you, I am not psychic. I have no psychic tendencies. There's none of that stuff happening. But I had the clearest picture of this angry male in a wife beater shirt snarling at me. I was like, it shocked me, right? Because after the experience, you're really open and sensitive.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, and at the point, like, she didn't disclose what she was dealing with. She just said, "Could you put your hands on your shoulder and be grounded?" And then she said, "Well, that sounds like my father." So that was kind of, that was out there. That was a little woo-woo for me.
Yeah.
But I can't. I don't have any rational experience other than, hey, like there are energy patterns and awarenesses that do get opened up when we're in that experience.
Yeah. I had a similar kind of energy jolt on mushrooms one time with some friends. There was about 4 of us, and we were like sitting listening to music, and we were like all sitting like Indian style, like I think we were talking, but like kind of like had our eyes closed and whatever. And in one of the rooms where the door was closed, like we heard like a loud thud, and we all stood up. And my one friend that was the closest, we were watching, and he went. We were like, he's going to go look in the room or whatever. And I don't believe there was anyone in the room at the time, too, which was weird. And he like stuck as soon as he stuck his hand on the doorknob. We all felt this like jolt of like fear come from him through the whole chain of all of us. And then the last person in the chain passed out, like standing up, fell over and passed out. And but we specifically felt it like, this fear just go through all of us. And then like he didn't even remember anything happening. Like he kind of like when he came to, he was obviously still tripping, but he like didn't even remember that. And it was really weird. Like we definitely felt that energy just kind of flow from whatever made that thud in the room through the door, through all of us, and it manifested in one of us passing out. I don't know if he would have passed out anyway or whatever, but it was a really surreal thing that, I don't really have an explanation for,
Well, and I think that's why it's important to, stay centered and have a, have an inner anchor, about what you perceive, quote, the light to be, right?
Yeah.
So the Santo Daime experience, like that, some of the structure can get a little annoying, and you really got to be able to put your ego in check and let it go, because you got to wear these kinds of clothes and do these kinds, and dance when they say dance and not dance, and run around, all this sort of thing. But there is a real heart opening energy, a real like, not to say that some of those works aren't, quote, work and you really have to work through it, but there is a real joy surrounding it, right?
Yeah.
And like, I want to just juxtapose that with the shamanistic tradition, because once you find out about a community, I mean, inevitably you're going to meet people, and those people know other people, and and like, next thing a couple of years later, saying, hey, I found a shaman, let's try this, right? So it's kind of like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Why don't we go there? And they brew their. I got to see how they make ayahuasca, right? Like, I was actually right there, and they had the big tins, the big vats, and then they layer it with like vine and leaves and vine and leaves and vine and leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Water, boil the crap out of it, and then take that water and put it again in vine leaves and keep making it stronger and stronger, right? And actually, that's as an aside. I got lazy one day, and I thought, well, the kids are drinking the water. It can't be that bad. So it was like an hour walk back to the camp or something like that, and I just couldn't be bothered. And I drank the water, and that was like a 9-day regret. I wanted to die. I was like this puddle of protoplasm in my hammock wanting to die. It's just the most evil thing. But yeah, so don't ever think about drinking the water in the Amazon.
Yeah.
No matter how good it looks, right? I mean, you're washing in it. It's pretty clear, like it's flowing, and Anyway, so I'm in Ontario, and this Western shaman trained by the guru down, one of the gurus down in Peru, and I never got to go to Peru, so I understand it's quite a production down there now. I don't think you have to go through the ordeal that you do for some of the jungle stuff in the Santo Daime tradition. I think you can. Yeah, I can't speak too much to it, but it sounds to me like it's a bit more straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, and they make their brew really strong. Like, it's the difference between, a strong beer versus port.
Yeah.
And I'm used to, on my first dose, having a full glass, and he's giving me like a quarter, and I'm going, oh, come on, and he looks at me and going, oh, okay, and he gives me half, and I still thought half, well, whatever, right? And it's my first time. I'll be okay. I'll just get some more later. And the stuff is like syrup. And by the way, ayahuasca tastes awful. Like, there's no way around it. It's basically rancid guava juice. It's just, you just gotta pucker up and get it done, and then forget about it.
Yeah.
And now you have this syrupy rancid guava juice. Some of it, and it's not every batch. It's not like industrial, right? So every batch is slightly different in color. Some of it is more reddish, some of it is more brownish. Anyway, I had the half, and it was the strongest thing I ever, like, it was close to that saturation experience. And I don't know, a couple hours in, the shaman's like calling my name, and you get to go up, and he kind of does his feather thing and sings at you, or the whole shamanistic stuff about moving the energy and the spirits and da 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 da. But in the shamanistic tradition, you do not sing, right? You're not an active participant. You come to the shaman does stuff, and then you're in your own experience. And he's calling my name, and I am gone. And my wife was with me, and she's kind of like elbowing me a bit, and and in my world, it's like way over there on the other side of the lake, somebody's calling me.
Yeah.
Like maybe 2 miles out, and I'm like trying to reel myself in, and I couldn't even walk to the guy. Like, it was maybe 10 feet. I basically crawled. So yeah, so beware. The concentrations on the Peruvian side are much stronger than.
Yeah. And how long was that after you drank the cup that it was that strong?
That's an interesting question, and we'll never know.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I would think, usually it takes, it's similar to mushroom, good half an hour to 45 minutes if you start to feel it, and then depending on the dosage, from there, if this dosage is really strong, you'll go pretty fast to the full experience. The one thing about ayahuasca is you definitely get much stronger visuals.
Yeah.
Than, like, in mushrooms, I get visuals. They tend to be more silvery bluish, sometimes dark greenish, but not bright, right?
Uh-huh.
And and mushrooms, interestingly enough, always they have sort of a rune pattern, like the runes you get in in medieval history. It's interesting. They're always there, but I don't get those patterns with ayahuasca. With ayahuasca, it tends to be a lot of circular vortices, but sometimes multidimensional, and a lot of oranges and reds coming in, and sometimes they're just sort of twirling in your peripheral visions, and sometimes they are like you are in it, like you are it, like it's all consuming, right? So, and and sometimes they can actually be distracting, because while you're having these full-on visuals, you're also having like a psycho-emotional experience that you want to process, right? So it takes a bit of getting used to sometimes. The sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So visuals, ayahuasca. So that's why the shamanistic experiences tend to be done in the dark, whereas you can have Santo Daime in the dark or in the light, or and you know, and to further to the whole thing about tradition and, you know, this is the way it is and all that. I do have to give the organization credit for not having any kind of attachment to where you're at regarding any kind of other tradition. Like it's not like they're saying, you know, you got to be a Catholic or you got to believe in Jesus or you got to be doing this, that, or anything. Like they do not care. It's like wide open. They offer the experience. They just ask that you participate according to their guidelines. That's all. And you know, and there's nobody that's going to hold you down and say, you know, you finish drinking or finish singing this hymn. Like if you're not feeling like it, there's plenty of places you can go and lie down. And in some of the works I've done that were outdoors, you know, there's places you can go off to the side and just be with nature, right? And so it's not that like it's structured, but it's not that structured, right? Whereas I've heard, I haven't done it, and it's on my list of things to do. Although I'm not sure I want to do it in the Native Indian tradition, but I've heard that in a Native Indian peyote experience, it is very structured, like sit up straight, you know, and do this, as opposed to like, I'm going to lie down now.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting back to the Peruvian stuff. So the shaman sings, and you're doing your visions and your inner processing, and the shamanistic tradition also has these add-ons where you can go on what they call a dieta or dieta. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing basically a diet. So you're not eating certain foods at all, and you're eating a lot of these other herbs and stuff, and you know, and some of the brews have nicotine, like tobacco leaves and stuff like that. And, it's pretty full on, right?
Yeah.
And so I never went that far. I felt, you know, all of these experiences have something to offer, but I never felt like I needed to go that far. Like at the end of the day, the experiences can be enlightening, they can be fun, they can be terrifying, but if you can't take it, like this is my inner pragmatist talking, right? Like if you can't take it back into your real life and improve your life, then what's the point? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So I did have two weird experiences in the shamanistic tradition, and I don't think it's a reflection of the shamanistic tradition itself. I think it's a reflection of the shaman, because those two were associated with the same shaman who was like one of the leaders in Peru, who came up to Canada, and like it didn't affect me personally that much, other than, you know, the energy was off. Like it, you know, I had like a sort of a flat or not so good work, but it wasn't like, wow, this was awesome, right?
Yeah.
But other people that were more sensitive were just saying like, you know, like that was the worst thing ever. That like that far corner of the room, like the devil was there, and like it was just like all this shit. It was like, whoa. And then another time, same guy, same shaman, this other guy I knew who's like an entrepreneur in Toronto, and like he is like, this guy is solid, right? Like he's not, you know, he's not like out there flaky or anything. Like, you know, he's a businessman. He's like solid, and this guy is freaking like he's experiencing intense physical symptoms of pain. Like he said, it's like somebody was stabbing him in the gut. Like he was throwing up. Throwing up goes with the thing, but like repeatedly throwing up and just in agony, right? Like everybody was worried about him, and this went on for hours.
Wow.
Like I've never seen anything like it, right? And then the next morning, you know, the shaman dude says, well, you know, we had a really dark energy in the room, and we almost lost somebody, but you know, everything's okay now. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't think I'm going to go to another work with you, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it speaks to the fact that you do have to be prudent uh, when you let the shaman run the show, right? And
Yeah.
and I want to particularly uh, point out that not all shamans are on the up and up, and there has definitely been reports of what shall we say, taking advantage of the shaman leadership role with respect to women. So
Mm-hmm.
so for women going out there and doing that, like you definitely want to not go alone, and you want to do your research and see what's going on, right?
Yeah.
But because when you're in that open state, I mean, like it's it's basically trivial to especially when you're coming from the leadership authority knowingness role to take advantage of that unduly.
Yeah. And yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, and honestly, that's a worry I have on my mind of, the upcoming revival and, increase in psychedelic therapy, even with MDMA or something like that.
Oh,
Is that,
particularly in MDMA,
yeah,
because it's so empathically opening, right? I mean,
yeah.
I've done it plenty of times. I've probably done maybe MDMA 20 times, and your mind starts doing stuff, right? Like you start really bonding with those people that you're doing stuff with, right? And then when you come out of it, you're going, okay, fine, like this is great, like we're really tight, but got to put some boundaries here, right?
Yeah. And I worry that, I'm glad that like the structure that maps that organization is setting up for MDMA therapy, it involves, a male and a female guide or therapist, that are in the room and whatever. But I worry about this, the underground psychedelic therapy that is there's going to be some bad apple and there's going to be a negative media story, which they're obviously going to pick up on a negative story, but before they start widely broadcasting the good stories of someone that has been sexually abusing people under their watch on MDMA, and that's going to be the headline story, unfortunately, about psychedelic therapy. And I really worry about that. And that's obviously, something that can happen for people going down by themselves to see shamans or going to, shaman ceremonies in North America, that unfortunately there's bad apples,
Yeah. And it's exacerbated by the fact that, it's sometimes you're motivated to seek out these things because you're dealing with some issues, and maybe one of your issues is not having enough boundaries, right? So it can be self-reinforcing, but it's to your point, like I think it's still all about education, because how many times have we heard that some bad apple dentist was sexually inappropriate with his female patients, right? I mean, that's not just happened once. But are we now going to make dentistry illegal?
Yeah, right.
Right. So I think it still comes down to education, and I can I can really appreciate especially practitioners being on the conservative side, because they see the tail end of the distribution, like the shit that can really go wrong, like when you have somebody that's unstable or some other condition that where an agent like a psychedelic agent can take them over the edge. But we need to put things into context and say, okay, let's address that, but let's not shut the door on people that maybe aren't dealing with really big stuff. I mean, it's big to them, but not like, should I be institutionalized or take drugs for the rest of my life? It's more like, how do I become a better human being? How do I make relationship better? How can I be more integral in myself, right? Like why would we make it difficult to let those people self-actualize and and get the best out of this. Like I think that's the challenge, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not just about how do we fix stuff. It's not just about like for me, it's not just about the medicalization. I know, okay, great. MDMA is great for PTSD and all that, and get those people back on the ground. But what about, the rest of us just going through life that can really benefit from this?
Yeah.
And hats off to you and your podcast and the likes of the Third Wave and everybody else that's talking about this, because it's in talking about it that the fear of the unknown gets dispelled.
Yeah. I mean, we're making headway, as a community, the psychedelic community, and everything. But we have so far to go, and it's unfortunate that so many people's perspective is media driven, and the media has no interest in promoting it. They're looking for the bad stuff to spread, and it's like, that's, like you said, it all comes down to education. You have to look past the clickbait articles, and really research the movement and the community.
Well, and research yourself, right?
Well, yeah.
What makes you tick? What makes you think that's true versus this is true? What makes you so convinced that this is, the rock bottom of truth, right? I mean, I was listening to what's his name? The guy from Patriot Act, the Hassan, what's his name? The comedian. You guys get Netflix?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he did a piece on the National Rifle Association, and I mean, he basically, whatever cause he takes up, I mean, he just lambastes the thick-headedness of whatever the issue is, and he had some video clips of these National Rifle Association people, and I mean, you could see it in their eyes. They are so in fear. They're so convinced that if they don't have that gun handy, that the world's going to get them, right?
Yeah.
And like they're so tight in their box, they don't even know they're in the box.
Yeah.
So like maybe those will never change them, but for the rest of us, knowing that the ego is the box and we can move outside the box or make the box bigger, that's big.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing I wanted to ask you, as someone who has gone, not just partaken in North America in a shamanistic, entheogenic use, but someone that has traveled to that, where those cultures originate. I mean, how do you feel about if the North American, wave of like kind of ceremonial, whether it's with ayahuasca or mushrooms or San Pedro, but when you have like a North American white guy that is doing the same chants and running these, these ceremonies and stuff like that. I mean, how do you feel about if it's cultural appropriation at all, or if North America should stick to creating their own traditions, or if it's just like kind of organically becoming a new tradition, much like how the ayahuasca ceremonies you went to that had, Catholicism involved or Christianity, how they kind of took the ayahuasca that was already there and kind of made their new culture with it. Do you think like North America is just making their own culture with entheogenic use, or do you think that it's some cultural appropriation?
Well,
like, did you feel like you were like a gringo invading their territory and just plopping down your money and pretending to be as enlightened as them, or did you feel that at all when you were going down there?
No, not at all.
Yeah,
not at all. I mean, and again, I wasn't in Peru, so I can't speak to the challenges they have in Peru, because apparently now it's becoming, like with the advent of these podcasts and having much more light on the whole thing. Never mind the Silicon Valley dive into microdosing and interest in psychedelics, I mean that you've got a steady flow heading into Peru, doing ayahuasca ceremony. So I think things have changed, and I think there's definitely a need to, what should we say, like you want to go down there and take advantage of what is being offered, but I don't know how the money flows in the Peruvian side, but you'd want to have something that gives back to the community, right? Like it shouldn't all go to the shaman and their retreat center. Like there should be a chunk in my mind that deals with, does this community now have enough clean water? That do we have an off the grid solar installation? Do we have just the bare bone basics that you need to live in that environment, and maybe throw in whatever things that benefit the community overall, rather than just the one institution, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, I would love to see them get built up from money flowing from North America into South America, of people going down for ayahuasca retreats. I would love to see their communities built up from that money, instead of factories being built there because they'll work for $1 a day or whatever, and I would rather see the money flow that for entheogens,
Yeah, and so in Mapia, I mean, some of that was happening. I remember, I don't know, some European country or people from that country donated a bunch of money to help with the generators and a solar installation, and there was some other talk about cleaning up the water and what have you. So, I don't think it's so much about taking anything away from them by participating. I think at the end of the day, no matter how you package it, right? Whether you put it into a cultural tradition, whether like such as Native Indian peyote or South American shamanism or some mix. I mean, they had on the Santo Daime side, they had an offspring that was heavily influenced by African mysticism, and they would have sort of these, I don't know how to call them, but basically people would have experiences and take on these past entities, and it was pretty wild. Like, what I'm trying to say is, like, there's all these different flavors and all these different ways of doing it, but to me, at the end of the day, it's you participate, you contribute, and B, you get back your experience, and what are you going to do with that experience? And whether it's packaged, in a red ribbon or in a yellow ribbon or in a green ribbon, I don't think matters that much. I think it matters is, like, who are you being when you show up, and is the exchange equitable?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it also comes down to, to use these, to get to that state, and using plant medicine to do it or whatever, it should get you to a place that culture doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter, like that. It should get you to that timeless, kind of egoless spot that you could be doing that anywhere under any circumstance and get the same growth from it,
Exactly. Everything you said, like, in that state, in that awareness, none of those outer form factors matter at all. And just to your point about how you get there, I have had 2 experiences without any kind of psychedelics, but they were associated with extreme fatigue, because I was doing one of my crazy mountain adventures, and at hour like 16 or something, it was like popping into the quietude of a psychedelic experience. After the rush of the mushrooms leaves you, and you're left in that state of pristine quietness. It was like that just spontaneously happened for about 2 minutes. Like, every bone in my body still ached. Every concern I had about getting off the mountain, because now the sun was setting, still happened, but I could just watch that and be with that with and still be totally happy.
Yeah.
So I think, these are tools that help us get there. And I think these are valid tools in this day and age when not everybody is willing to commit to, 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night meditation practice.
Yeah.
It's like that's bare bones, right? I mean, to really get there, like, these Vipassana retreats, etc. I mean, these are like 7 to 10 days. You can, the opposite the spectrum, you've got DMT in 15 minutes, right?
Yeah. It's I think of myself personally, like, I think the experience would help me get through that, but just going down to South America to search for, enlightenment and to do that, like, my own, like, self-doubt and self-ridicule would be like, you're a poser, you're just a tourist just trying to do whatever, and like, but it's weird because I don't I understand why people go on that quest to do that, but then at the same token, like, I don't want to see the North American ayahuasca traditions get to a point where, there's Memorial Day 2-for-1 Groupon deals, and stuff like that.
I don't think that's an immediate threat.
No, not immediate, but I guess it'd be nice to have that problem.
I think it's self-correcting though, right?
Yeah.
Even if somebody gets sucked into, like, an uber commercialized version of it, that they're gonna come to their own conclusion, and if it's got too much of that, it's kind of like the debate now that's going on between, are we using it, like in Silicon Valley, are we using the psychedelics to make the world a better place? Are we using the psychedelics to just, build more apps that do whatever, but don't really have any regard for the betterment, right? Like, are we using them to maintain the status quo, or are we using them to look at possibilities beyond what we're used to?
Yeah.
And I think, there's no doubt in my mind that psychedelics are not a guarantee for enlightenment by any stretch, and nor are they a guarantee for aligning to the truth. Like, if you have a really strong ego, and you don't have a commitment to being open and to seeing yourself as not being right. I mean, to actually see that, hey, this is not working. Then your ego mind can twist that thing around and basically subvert it.
Yeah.
And so so maybe, that's where a spiritual foundation can help, or at least being with others who can moderate, perhaps your like, if that person has I don't know, narcissistic tendencies or some whatever. Like, if you have other people doing the experience and you share, then you can actually get a reference point of, hey, am I way out here, or am I seeing something that maybe needs looking at?
Yeah.
So as far as feeling like a fake, no, I mean, that there were, I think the level of consciousness that's being expressed by the tribal people, personally, I can't say it's significantly different than what I was experiencing, or the people that were down there that were foreigners.
Yeah.
And to your point, I mean, like, I can't say, this shaman is, quote, a bad shaman, right? I can't categorically say that, but I can say that for those 2 works, 2 out of 3, when I was with this shaman, these weird, fucked up experiences happened. So, like, use discretion. And he's probably done thousands of ceremonies. So, if he's so enlightened, why does that shit happen in his ceremonies?
Yeah. Now, yeah, and I mean, I guess that comes down to maybe, the Western kind of infrastructure of 5-star reviews and stuff like that comes into play, too, and that can help. But I wonder too, like Stan, have you watched that show like Kentucky Ayahuasca?
Yeah, I have.
So I've only seen clips. I've never watched a whole show. How much like tradition does that guy add into that?
He's definitely trying to make his own traditions. It's strange because they try to dramatize it for television, obviously,
For sure, yeah.
But it's very weird. It's very small groups, so they do like 4 or 5 people at once. And he is part of some church. I'm not sure what religion it is, but it is a church. That's how it's legal, is because it's under that law. But his work, or at least the work that they show, is like staring in a mirror with a blue light on you, or it's very, very personal type of stuff that it's almost, I don't know. I stopped watching it because it's just too cheesy for me,
Right. Yeah.
But that's his type of work is look at a mirror, or like, I don't know. It wasn't any dancing or anything like that. For the majority of the time, it's people laying down, and then you have like a narration type of camera view, them telling you what their experience is like. And it didn't really seem like there was much else going on. And on top of that, I think it was just like a 1, 2, or 3 night thing. It wasn't anything long term.
Yeah.
Well, even the act of disclosing your experience during the experience changes the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, seems kind of strange to me. I think, look at spirituality, the hundreds of different traditions, and look at all the different meditation styles, right? I mean, every one of them, addresses some merit of some sort, right? I mean, when you think about human evolution, I mean, everything is basically trial and error, and then some stuff just stuck more than others, and some stuff continues to stick even though it's not very useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But
at the end of the day, like, we know that long-term meditators, are much more centered, are much more aware, right? Like, I don't know if you remember that experiment where they had 2 flashes separated by like some really, really small time frame, like milliseconds. And somebody that wasn't meditating, they just saw 1 flash, but a meditator actually said there were 2 flashes. And so, it is, basically that tells you that there's much more awareness. And then within that awareness, then you can exercise, control, and within that choice, or that not control, but choice. And then by exercising choice, you can retrain your mind to choose things that are more constructive. So, if you're about to lash out to your wife because she didn't fill up the gas tank, you could catch that thought and go, well, is this really important? And, is my life going to end? Is this really a threat? No, it's not really a threat. So thank you, ego, but no thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you develop any practice like after your experiences with psychedelics that you've done on a daily basis?
I spend at least 20 minutes a day meditating.
Okay.
And I document all my psychedelic experiences. And then I have experimented with microdosing for a while, and I've tracked or documented the results of that. And so, I keep myself accountable, because I'm very pro psychedelics under the right circumstances with the right intention.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to put my money where my mouth is, and if I don't, if I just have the experience and then go to same old where I don't catch myself, or like I said, relationship is my shtick, right? So even though I've been married for 10 years, there have been challenging times, and so rather than like, inevitably you slip, right? You fall down and you mess it up, and at the time, like, that's the best that I could do. But then 20 minutes later, half an hour later, maybe an hour later, but certainly no longer, I catch myself, and then I can say, then I can come back and I can say, hey, I was wrong, and I'm sorry, and then make a mental note that the ego got away on me that time, and to be aware of. So the meditation really helps increase that awareness that you need to change the habits. So I think if you're going to call it a practice, that would be the practice.
Okay.
Watching myself.
Yeah. It's ongoing.
and oh yeah, it's definitely ongoing.
Yeah.
And I mean, life happens all the time, and sometimes life happens too quickly for you to catch your knee-jerk reactions, right? And sometimes you need a knee-jerk reaction because, hey, if somebody's throwing a bottle at you, you're not just going to go and be with that. You're going to shield your face and let the bottle bounce off your elbow, right? I mean, certain responses are useful, but the vast majority of our non useful behaviors, if you will, they're just bad habits of thought that are trying to keep us safe, but really aren't. And they don't have to do with other people either, right? I mean, something happens and it wasn't an outcome that you wanted. Then, if you have if the ego wants to capitulate and throw you into a short-term mood swing, if you're not aware of that tendency to question your thoughts, because basically it comes down to don't believe everything your ego serves up, which is don't believe every thought you have, because every thought you have is not genuine, not from genuine truth, right? It comes from ego land. So I think that's the practice, and you don't need to package that in any kind of religious or spiritual tradition, right? If anything, you could say it's probably closest to Buddhism, right? Because they don't really have any religious packaging. They just say, be aware of the mind.
Yeah. I mean, and it's something I've seen some articles and stuff about some, really progressive schools that are starting to teach mindfulness and meditation to, elementary school kids, and oh man, I love that. I wish they would do that instead of nap time in schools, because society now with our how we're just ingrained into social media and internet and everything like that, the kids that's a tool that is helping us adults kind of not get caught up in the flow. I wish we could teach that tool to kids that aren't in the flow yet, but are going to be, and it's going to, the flow is going to structure their life, and to help them, focus and everything like that. I really wish that, that would be a more common thing that's happening at a younger age, to give that discipline.
Yeah. And then, and I think there's pockets, right? There's definitely pockets out there. The other thing that along with that is awareness of your emotional state, right? I mean, as a Western male, we are emotionally compromised, right? I mean, stiff upper lip, don't show your emotions, be tough, all that emotional suppression is built in.
Yeah.
And then, you get married and your wife wants you to be emotionally sensitive, and you're going what language are you speaking, right?
Yeah.
I was so good at suppression that when I went to a chick flick when I was dating and the whole theater was crying, I just felt like a little blip stop at my navel. No feelings whatsoever. It was completely cut off. And so, there's a lot of that going on, and just being able to be comfortable. And it's okay, fine. Right now, I'm feeling anger. Doesn't mean I have to act out. Doesn't mean I have to chop down a tree or crush somebody's skull. No, I'm just feeling angry. And then, once that passes, then it's okay, fine. I had some reaction, and and then you process that and work with it. But man, if I could have saved myself for sure 2 divorces if I had a little more emotional intelligence, right? And I mean, you can watch all those podcasts and videos on emotional intelligence, but it's real, right? I mean, it's part of who we are.
Yeah, for sure. Well, man, we're at over an hour and a half, and I know we could keep talking for a while, but we should probably wrap it up. But it's super great talking to you, man. I really I I love your stories of the ayahuasca experiences, and the outlook it's given you. That's really great to hear.
Well, and I appreciate you asked me on, and I hope this helps some people to perhaps consider the benefits cautiously and with discernment, and for those that are definitely on the far side of the fence, to perhaps open the box and maybe look out the window.
Yeah.
So thanks, Stan and Ruben.
Yeah, absolutely. And and as always, anyone listening that has been thinking about coming on, or has a story to tell, or just wants to talk about stuff and get involved in the conversation, just give me an email, help find the others at protonmail.com. And also, as I keep saying, make sure you respond to my response. There's been several people that, I hope they reconnect, because there's some pretty good stories out there. And I know there's more, and there's just some people that haven't reached out. So don't be afraid to reach out. And as always, there's the Google number that you can call or leave a text. And what's that number, Stan?
567-233-1335.
Awesome. And yeah, that's about it for today. And until then, thanks for helping find the others.